Hello, everybody. Immigration is, of course, a very timely issue, and we are delighted to have Dr. Lynn Leverty here to joining us to talk about that issue. Dr. Leverty has a PhD in international relations from the American University. The first segment of her career was in politics, including 7 years working with Governor Ann Richards of Texas and running a small Texas state agency. After her years in Texas, she and her family moved to Florida. In Florida, she was on the faculty at the University of Florida, where she taught courses in women and politics, politics of immigration, and graduate and undergraduate courses in public leadership and ethics. She was also assistant director for the Askew Institute and the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, where I had the pleasure of working with her. So please welcome Dr. Lynn Leverty. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I never pick easy subjects to talk about, and this one is probably one of the most difficult to talk about in the United States right now. Please forgive me. I am horribly allergic to rain trees, and so my voice is going to sound a little rough today because they are doing whatever they do that makes me allergic. One of the issues that's so interesting about immigration in all the policy issues that I've worked at over the years is that immigration has a domestic aspect, it has a foreign aspect, and it has a humanitarian aspect. There aren't that many public policy issues that affect not only the country that it is taking place in, but also countries around the world, which means that we get pressure from other countries, we get requests from other countries, we have to think about what other countries think when we make policy in this country, and so it does make this an even more interesting issue than many of the other issues that I sometimes talk about. Now, we do have a time and place in this state where we had a reasonably successful crisis that was taken care of. Does anybody remember the spring of 1980? What was it? The Mariel boat lift. We had obviously been welcoming Cubans into the country for a number of years. At that point in time, the only way you could be a refugee in the United States was if you were coming from a communist country. So a very simple definition. If you were a ballet dancer and you could get over the barrier somewhere, or you were somebody who could get on a boat from Cuba, you were immediately accepted into the United States. Well, in the spring of 1980, dissidents in Cuba decided that not enough people were getting out of the country. They wanted to get out of the country. They wanted to leave. And the first place they asked actually was the Peruvian embassy, the poor Peruvian embassy. And they started gathering at the Peruvian embassy, and then they started gathering at other embassies, and it became a sort of a world crisis. And we finally said, well, we'll take a few more Cubans, and somebody else can take a few more Cubans, and then that'll sort of settle things. Well, the whole thing exploded. People started gathering on the shores of Cuba. They started renting fishing boats. They started renting motorboats. They started renting anything that would get the 90 miles from Cuba to South Florida. By the way, if you were in Key West, you ducked a lot because you were terrified of what was going to happen. Castro got annoyed at all this. He got annoyed at the countries that were going to allow his citizens in because, of course, if you allow a refugee into your country, you are criticizing that nation. You are saying that they cannot take care of their own residents. So anytime you allow a refugee in, you are saying you can't take care of your own residents. So, and I meant to change this. Oh, no. Am I going to be another one of those who can't do this? There we go. Okay, so what happened was Cubans from all over came to stand on the shore of Cuba. And they were renting all the fishing boats, they were renting all the motorboats, they were renting everything. And they just started coming for the United States in droves. We're talking at the end of the fall, we had 150,000 new Cuban residents and 25,000 Haitian residents. who we had to process. We had to figure out who they were. We had to figure out what to do with them. And so Governor Graham, who center I worked in and who I adored, called a state of emergency, like every governor does if suddenly 150,000 people land in your shores. By the way, the interesting thing about Cuba is about Florida is we are not a land border. We are a water border, which makes immigration to this state very different unless somebody walks in from Alabama or Georgia or whatever. We are a land border. And so Castro got annoyed and he let all these people go. So everybody who had a relative in Miami or Southern Florida also rented a boat, and they went to Cuba to pick up people, and they would get Uncle Susan or Cousin Marco, and then they might pick up 3 or 4 other people who had no particular relation to them, but they wanted to leave and brought them back. Well, Castro also opened the prisons and he opened the mental institutions at the same time. Why would he do that? To make us really, really, really uncomfortable and to make processing so much more difficult. It was fairly easy to reunite Cubans with family members. You can do that. You can check them out. These people brought papers. They brought documents with them. People from mental hospitals and prisons and all those kinds of, and other just miscellaneous people who ended up on the dock might not have those. Well, the United States reacted really well. The President, Carter was the president at that time. He immediately sent in aid. We actually did use the National Guard at that time, but not to arrest people, but to just move people from place to place. The stadium was full, Chrome Detention Center was full, other things were full. Had to move people out into the United States. They were moved into military installations. One of the reasons that Clinton lost his governor's race was actually due to the Cubans that were in Fort Chaffee in Arkansas, because they got a lot of the people who had come from mental institutions. And I remember essentially one man running around in a set of pink rollers and terrifying everybody with how well he was. Anyway, within about 2 years, virtually everyone was processed. And they were taken care of during the time that they were processed. We did try to settle people outside of Florida simply because the numbers here were so large. But guess what happened? They came back to Florida. They had family here. They had culture here. We settled the group in Minnesota, and for some reason, Minnesota didn't really fit with the culture that they were used to. Now, there certainly were some problems. This is Chrome Detention Center in South Florida. We were obviously not ready for the numbers. This is not exactly where you would like to put people initially. We are now, by the way, using Chrome as a detention center again for people that we are arresting and want to deport. But at least they were safe. So what happened to this? And this is where the economy comes in. A number of economists have studied what happened to the Mariel boat lift because it was so large and it was so concentrated on one state. And it turned out that the Marielitos were absorbed in the economy. We did not have huge problems with absorbing them, partially because when immigrants come in, they often start businesses to that effect. So your food looks familiar and your goods look familiar and things look familiar. And otherwise, they took other kinds of jobs. So there was no downturn in the Florida economy. Now, a couple of economists will say, well, we didn't have wages rise, and that's probably true because of the number of people. But it was not an economic crisis. It was only a short-term crisis for Florida. It was not a long-term crisis for Florida. So we know we can do these things. We know we can bring people in and settle them and make it work, even when we didn't expect them. And we certainly did not expect Castro to open the gates and say, hey, any of you all want to leave? Go for it. So where are we today? Well, one thing we are in an administrative mess. One of the problems about immigration is in the 20th century, we used to, about every 25 years, we would write a new comprehensive immigration law because our status in the world changed. After World War II, we were not a world power. We could worry about smaller things. By the 1960s, we were world powers. The 1965 Act was really important. Since then, we have not been able to do a comprehensive immigration plan, which is a mess because we have all kinds of things that we really shouldn't have in the law. We have things that don't pertain, things we need to be saying, and we're not doing it. The system is also grossly underfunded, except for this year when we suddenly have $170 million for detention and deferral. But traditionally, it's grossly underfunded. It's very hard for somebody in Nebraska to go home and say, yes, we're funding the immigration system so that we can funnel people through quickly and either send them home or keep them or whatever we need to do. So we were traditionally underfunded. And I'll talk a little bit about why one section isn't right now. But this is our current system, and this is what occurred after 2001. Where once we realized that a group of immigrants came into the country and flew airplanes into the Pentagon and the World Trade Center and the field in Florida, we needed to do something about at least the offensive part of the system. So the Department of Homeland Security is an agency that was pulled together from a lot of other agencies. And I can tell you it had a really rough start because it's very difficult to take pieces of agencies and try to put them into other agencies when they are culturally and, you know, their computers are different, their culture is different, their rules are different. So it's had a rough ride. Right now, the agency, the thing that we hear most about them is immigration enforcement, the ICE group, where every time you turn around, there's a headline about ICE. They run ICE. They also run border security, which I forgot to put in there. And they run a program called E-Verify. And this is a program that an employer is supposed to be able to contact the federal government and see if an employee is able to be employed. E-Verify is a mess. And I don't know that there's any way not to make it a mess because names duplicate. Many of the people that they're talking about move around the country on seasonal work. Even there, I don't know about you, I got my name mixed up with somebody in high school, and this, of course, was before we had computers, and they told me I was going to fail high school. So names are very easy to get confused. By the way, I did pass. We got it straightened out. I wasn't Linda, I was Lynn. Linda, I don't know what happened to. So ICE is the biggest and most important, and right now, the most funded agency in the federal government, except maybe for the Department of Defense. $170 million has been given to ICE and to Homeland Security, primarily ICE, to find and deport people that we don't want in the country. They also do humanitarian programs, which I'll talk about a little bit, like temporary protected status, which is what affects Haitians in this state. The Department of Justice is the legal arm. They're the ones that if you apply and you need to be processed, the immigration judges are there, and they're the ones that would look at your case and decide if there's any problem about your case. About half of them have been fired, and they're being replaced right now by military judges. That I think is probably a problem because military judges know military law, but they don't really know immigration law, and immigration law is incredibly confusing. Every time I think I understand what I'm talking about, I don't understand what I'm talking about at times because it's changed in things. The State Department does visas. There are more than 180 different kinds of visas. This is one of the areas we desperately need reform. Nobody needs 100+ visas. And these are both immigrant visas, people who want to come here and stay and are hoping to be able to come here and stay, and tourist visas or short-term work visas. For instance, if anybody remembers the Hyundai plant in Georgia, where all of a sudden we sent all the workers there home, they were on a short-term work visa, it expired. Now, the usual way we've done that in the past is if it's a company, they have these workers, we know where they are, the workers stay where they are, they're not wandering around, they're not trying to do other things. The government kind of looks the other way because the cost and time of processing, several hundred workers isn't worth the thing. So, but what they're required to do is report in regularly, report their numbers regularly, report who's there regularly. And then if it goes on forever, they may have to reapply. At the moment, Hyundai is in negotiations to bring workers back. But the interesting thing is a lot of workers don't want to come. So we're not sure when the Hyundai plant will be in operation. All right, the Health and Human Services does refugee resettlement. We are not accepting refugees at the moment, except there was a small group of South Africans who were allowed into the country a few months ago, but we are not accepting refugees at the moment. They do children and families. If you've heard anything about the separation of children and families or what happens to unaccompanied minors who come into the country, and we've had a number of them from Central America and South America over the last few years. They're the group that does that. And the Department of Labor is supposed to do data, but nobody's doing data at the moment. And they do labor certification. And labor certification means I need to bring in an X. I don't have an X. I need a seasonal farm worker. I need something like that. Is there anybody else in the country who can do it? If there isn't, then you can bring in your seasonal worker, or you can try to get another kind of visa for somebody to come in. Under the current administration, most of these visas are not being used. They have cut down the number. We'll talk about, I can talk about the $100,000 HB1 certification and in some place out. But in most cases, most of these are not being used. We're not accepting very many people into the United States at this point. Okay, so who's here? 5 million people. Some of those Mario boat lift people. There are 5 million people who were born in other countries who are in Florida at this point. It's about 22% of our population, which in comparison to North Dakota or other places, we have a high population of foreign-born people. And our geography makes that a thing. Our history makes that an issue. They come from 200, as I'm saying up here, come from 200 countries, but as you can imagine, most of them are from Cuba, Haiti, Colombia, Venezuela, and Mexico. The Mexican population was not large in the state for a long time. But then as we needed more seasonal workers and there were areas of Texas that became problematic, people moved here. So this is the rest have been here for a long, long time. That is obviously a product of geography. Other states get other things. Most of them, the majority of them have been in this country for more than a decade. Some of them obviously came as early as the 1950s for Cubans, earlier for other countries. They're younger. And the fact that they're younger means more of them are employed than in the general population. So virtually all of our immigrants are employed. Now, that doesn't mean they're all employed legally, but they're employed. Now, there is an interesting thing that is happening right now, and we're seeing this with some companies and some people that I'm talking to, that some immigrants who may not have all their documentation are now staying home. They're not leaving the state, but they're not going to work. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute because it's becoming a real problem for some industries. 56% are naturalized, and there are another 600 who could be. They're on green cards, and they've been here long enough to do that. I just actually had 2 friends who went through their naturalization exam in the last 6 months. They're going to be at the ceremony at the courthouse in November. And they had a very different experience, both of them, in terms of their exams. One of the things they do is they ask you, there's a 100-question citizenship test, and they can ask you any 6 questions on that test. And if you can imagine, if you're in a grumpy mood and you're the naturalization person, you may ask all of the difficult questions, and somebody else may ask all the ones about, like, how long does the U.S. Senator's office or something like that. So these can be very, very different. Some people are scared. They'll keep on their green cards because they're scared. Right now, they're scared to go for naturalization tests. So we're seeing fewer and fewer people who are going ahead and moving into citizenship. Now, most Haitians, Colombians, and Venezuelans and Nicaraguans are on something called temporary protective status or humanitarian parole. Temporary protected status was actually created by, I think, George H.W. Bush as a way to help people in countries where something suddenly just falls apart. There's an earthquake in Haiti, and Haiti cannot take care of its citizens. People could come here for a period of time, and then when things settle down, they could go home. We've had two problems with this. One is Haiti has never settled down. There's now starvation in Haiti. So legally, we are not supposed to be allowed to send someone home unless they're going to be okay. You know, they're going to have food, they're going to have a place to live, they're not going to be, anything's going to happen to them. And the second is because we don't have a lot of money in the processing system, by the time we really start processing people and saying, well, maybe it's time for you to go home, they've been here for 10 years, they're married, they bought a house, they have children, and it becomes a whole different kind of situation. So the processing speed has been not good. And of course, obviously, especially Haiti is a failed state. There's nothing else we can say about it. Now, about 1 million people are undocumented, and that is a very loose figure. We do not in this country, when we do the census, count whether someone is a citizen or not. And we would do that, and this actually came, President Trump actually tried to change that during his first administration. And the Census Bureau and Supreme Court said no, because we want to know how many people are here, and people won't answer if they're undocumented. So being able to determine what kind of things states would get, how much of any kind of money they would get, how many members of Congress they would get, would all be completely screwed up if we asked people whether they were citizens or not. So we don't. So estimates of undocumented are not very good. We do know that there are a number in Florida, a large number in Florida, and virtually all of them are employed. Okay, so. There we go. So what are the issues in Florida right now? Well, it's a long list, so I tried to cut it down a little bit. One of the first is money. Governor DeSantis decided to go ahead and build the Southern Detention Center, which is better known as Alligator Alcatraz, but I absolutely refuse to use that name, with state money, with the idea that it was going to be paid back by the federal government. It has been paid back, but now there is a problem with it because any federal entity has to undergo an environmental study. And there is a good way to think that probably that particular facility is not on land that you should be building a large detention facility on. So that one is now in trouble. We are building 2 more with state money. Hopefully they will be also reimbursed. But we do know that some of the people at the Southern Detention Center are not in federal removal process. So what does that mean? That means the federal government has nothing to do with some of the people who are at the federal detention center, so they're not going to pay for them. It looks as if they were arrested by Florida police, somebody, and sent to the detention center, which is actually not legal because the only people who are allowed to do immigration are the federal government. Someone tried to do a class action suit in behalf of all of the residents of the Southern Detention Center, and Department of Justice went to court and said, part of them are not ours. You can't do a class action suit because they're yours. They're not ours, and we don't have anything to do with them. So it's somewhat of a thing. We do know that a few people have been sent home for about $5,000 a pop that were not federally part of this federal system. So we are probably paying for those. Detention, by the way, is extremely expensive. Healthcare is another huge issue. 25% of the doctors in this state are foreign-born. They usually come in on a student visa, the last part of their medical training, residency, internship, and then we switch them over to an HB1 visa and they are allowed to stay in the country legally. We also have about 25% of nurses. They come through a foreign staffing process, but they also eventually need an HB1 visa as well, which is why the $100,000 fee that has been imposed by the administration for new HB1 visas is going to have a severe impact on the health facilities in the state. Because we are simply, there's no hospital that is going to be able to hire lots of doctors with a $100,000 fee. So hospitals right now and are deferring hiring of foreign-born doctors, hoping that this will be resolved. So if you've ever had, if most of you are probably with Shands, I would think. If you find out if your geriatric doctor keeps not being there, and then there's another one and they're still not there, and there's not another one, they're still not there, you're going to see a downturn in the number of doctors we have right now because nobody can afford the new visa. And nothing holds them here. If they decide to leave the state, on an HB1 visa, you can go work anywhere you want to. So we are also seeing some doctors that are simply just leaving. Home health aides are in a different category, and I'll talk about them in a minute, but about 60% of home health aides are also foreign-born. So that is going to have an impact. The administration has now decided that, and has gone to court, and the Supreme Court has said that they can do this to remove temporary protected status and humanitarian parole from Haitians and Nicaraguans. Now, it will be a revolving removal. Saying that very fast gets to be a bit difficult because there are different dates where they're allowed to remove them. But they have certified to the court that Haiti and Venezuela will be safe for returnees. Obviously, like many other things in this is in court because I think you can probably make a good case that Haiti, especially Haiti, is not a safe place to go home to, especially since things like the World Central Kitchen are trying to feed people in part of the state. This is where home health agencies and nursing homes get a lot of employees, is in the temporary protected status. These people are very willing to work there. They make very good aides. They're very sympathetic. And so the home health agencies and nursing homes are already beginning to lose personnel. I'll talk a little bit about what their solution is in a minute, but we're also going to lose those people as well as they are deported. Now, then we get to our undocumented immigrants. Obviously, the administration is trying to remove undocumented immigrants from the country. Now, the secret is, and it's not really much of a secret, is that the U.S. economy rests on undocumented immigrants in many, many cases. They're doing jobs that nobody else will do. We found that out. Alabama, a number of years ago, passed some very strict laws about employment and about being able to drive someone who is an undocumented immigrant or be able to have anything to do with anything with undocumented immigrants. And people left the farms and things in Alabama. And the governor had set up a work bank where they listed the farmers could list all the jobs and everything that they needed people for, with the idea that unemployed people could take those jobs. My father once told me that he had to pick cotton when he was a kid, and it was one of the best reasons why he ever went to college, because he decided this was not what he wanted to do. The same thing happened in Alabama. The farmers went completely crazy because there was absolutely no one to work, because no one wants to sit out in 100-degree weather and pick blueberries. And so there are problems. So at one point, President Trump talked about actually getting a bypass for some workers who were on farms especially. But I think that, and he thought that there was a good idea that maybe perhaps we could have a special kind of documentation for that. We do have, by the way, seasonal visas for farm workers, but there's not nearly enough as needed to be, and they tend to be gotten by the big corporate farms who can do the processing and who can do the paperwork and who do all those kinds of things, and smaller farmers rarely ever get them. So interestingly enough, now I don't think of the Florida Farm Bureau as a radical group of people. In fact, in my doing with them, I found them to be very nicely conservative and all these kinds of things. The Federal Farm Bureau has called this a threat to national security, saying that if the crops are reduced because of a lack of workers, this will be a threat to national security because we will have to rely on foreign food. Well, we already rely heavily on foreign food. Most of your avocados come from the state of Michoacan in Mexico. My parents used to live there when they retired, and a lot of beautiful mountains have been turned into avocado fields, some of which, by the way, are run by cartels. They don't just do drugs and those kinds of things. They do avocados and other things. So we have, and I hear from a lot of the farmers that we are not going to be able. If you like eating soybeans, however, by the way, we do have a surplus in soybeans because the Chinese have decided not to buy our soybeans, so we may all be eating soybeans. I'm not sure that's even a thing, but okay. All right, in construction, we're hearing the same thing. There's something, all of the construction agencies and construction businesses in the country have gotten behind something called Building America Stronger Act. And that would create a legal path for about 900 undocumented workers who now work in construction. That is obviously Congress is not going to pass that at this point. But about 70% of our roofers are undocumented immigrants. I don't know if anybody has gotten their roof done any kind in the last 10 or 15 years, but all you will hear is Spanish because they virtually all of them are from Latin America. And last year, the Florida Resident and Lodging Association asked the Florida legislature to create what they termed an essential worker permit. Now, interestingly enough, states are not allowed to do immigration permits. This is solely a federal idea. So, immigration is solely a federal issue because obviously we can't have immigration in one state that looks different than immigration in another state, which looks different than another state. But they asked the Florida legislature to do this. And if the undocumented immigrant, and I may be, oh no, not here yet. No, okay, we're going backwards, sorry. There we are, okay. I'm sorry, I'm doing this all wrong. We'll just keep going. Okay. They asked the legislature if they could live in Florida for 3 years and meant basic eligibility to be able to be lawfully employed in the state. That was actually an illegal ask because states cannot make you legal. But instead, the lawmakers made it easier for teenagers to work. I'm not sure I want teenagers building my roof, but it obviously didn't pass. And again, roofers. So we do very much rely on immigrant workers in this state. Now, the ICE raids, we are not going to be subject to the kind of raids that are happening in Portland or California or Chicago or anything like that. The administration is not going to bring people here to do that. We're not going to see them running down the street in Gainesville in huge, large vans and coming out with masks on their face and doing things. There certainly have been ICE agents in Gainesville. We're not going to see that. But ICE has been active. For instance, in Tallahassee, there is a building near the state capitol that was going to be this gorgeous, great show place. They arrested 100 workers and the site is still closed down. So we are seeing places that are closed down. You see. All right, just to let you know, this is Alligator Alcatraz, or the Southern Detention Center, before it was open. Now, do you notice that there's some things missing? Restrooms, yes, restrooms, showers, all kinds of things. Yeah, so, and there seem to be, we do have abundance of mosquitoes and other kinds of things, which of course anybody who's ever been in the Everglades knows about. So this is alligator Alcatraz. I thought I would just show you what it looked like. This, of course, is our Stop Haitians. The Haitians have not only a large population, but a very vocal population at the moment. And this is what a detention flight looks like, just to let you know that all of those people are handcuffs, and many of them are also in leg irons. So, oh, and this is the Tallahassee ice raid on that building. Now, who has economic concerns? Well, I've already really, in many cases, talked about this. It's the hospitals and the nursing homes, home health care. The Florida Nursing Home Association has already sent a petition in saying we are not going to be able to fill what we need because we are not going to be able to get, people are either scared to go to work or they're being deported, and we are losing people. At least one or two in South Florida have had to close down. Also, maids are going to be a huge problem because a lot of domestic workers are undocumented immigrants. We've talked about the Florida Farm Bureau and their call for emergency. Construction industry the same way. And construction industry is also going to be hit by tariffs. Because a lot of the goods that we have come from Florida, come from China to make. And the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association has also sent in a petition saying, please, we're not going to have servers, we're not going to have cooks, we need these people. So, large group of people in Florida who are very concerned about what is happening in terms of detentions and deportations. Now, Lynn asked me to talk about the economic impact. Well, obviously, economic impact is changing as people disappear. Either they are deported or they're not coming to work or whatever. We are seeing a number of industries that are going to be in trouble. But economists agree that in general, immigration has been a net benefit to the United States. And we're talking not only about the scientists who created the bomb and the scientists who've won Nobel Prizes that are foreign-born. We're also talking about mid-level workers. We probably went a little overload on tech workers. We probably could have made more of those ourselves. And then undocumented low-income workers who have been filling lots of jobs that we don't want. In the last 10 years, we've found that foreign-born entrepreneurs contributed about $13 billion to the US economy. And those are new jobs. Those are new businesses, new jobs. And even immigrants pay an enormous amount of taxes. And of course, the undocumented do not get anything back because they're not subject to Social Security and income tax and all other kinds of things. But they still pay about $48 billion in the last 10 years, including that $5 billion for Medicare. So that's where we are economically. If I finished in time, Lynn, for Q&A? Okay.
You've done a great job of identifying the problems and the concerns of employers and others. Has anybody in the Trump administration or in conservative think tanks thought through how our economy needs to change to accommodate these immigration policies?
Well, as I said, President Trump at one point did say that he would like to see some special provisions for workers who are in agriculture. He said that several times, but nothing has happened in terms of that. Although I will say that probably ICE is not hitting agriculture as much as it is, say, construction and other kinds of things. Otherwise, not really. We think that there is trying to figure out how I can say this. There was a lot of anger, I think, at the companies that are coming forward and saying we need workers, that if somebody's going to have to think of a way that if you send all our Haitians back to Haiti, that we don't have anybody as a home health aide. And this is why we're beginning to get the $100,000 H-1B visa, that will probably change. The Chamber of Commerce just filed a suit. There were a group of universities and think tanks and interesting enough religious organizations that have filed suit against the H-1B visa. One of our biggest immigration categories is actually religious people, which is one that we don't usually think of. But not really. There have been ideas that it's okay that we just grow most of our fruits and vegetables overseas and bring them in. But then the tariffs come into that. It's a bit confusing right now. I think a lot of it is very, very emotional and not terribly well thought out. That may change as businesses and other groups begin to come forward and say, hey, we need to rethink this. But right now, a lot of it's just emotional reaction, which isn't a good answer. I'm sorry.
Any other questions? There's one over here. I'll bring the microphone over.
Thank you for the talk. I enjoyed that. What do you think are the long-term implications for the current immigration policy if those are continued for, let's say, the next 4 years?
I think there's going to be a lot of dislocation in the economy. We are going to have problems with food production and significant personnel. I think ideally, there was a group in Congress a few years ago, right before the first Trump administration, called the Gang of Eight, that actually had created a fairly good plan for reviewing the immigration system and trying to figure out. And President Reagan actually did an amnesty years ago, saying that, we want to keep these people. They're working hard. They've been here for 10 years. I don't see a solution right now. And I think it will depend on who stays in the White House. And one of the things we know about the White House is people usually burn out after about 2 years. It's a crazy place to work. And it may be that as some of the people who are the most adamant about getting rid of anyone who's in the United States under status that they don't like, we may get people in who are more interested in the larger economic picture. But I think right now what we have is unfortunately a political issue, number one, and immigration's always been a political issue. People have always used immigrants, we had the know-nothings back in the 18th century. People have always used immigrants as a them and us kind of thing politically. So I think that is there's a significant group that likes that right now. And I think we also have a couple of people in the White House that do not want to change this. I think cost may also become a factor. It's extremely expensive to detain people for 3 months. And right now, the normal way that if you found someone who was undocumented that you wanted to deport, is they would be taken in, they would be arraigned, they would have time to go home and get things put together, so that you could take care of your family or take care of your finances or whatever. And then you would be put on a plane and sent to hopefully your home or somewhere you knew. Right now, the law is requiring that we put people in detention for 3 months, or up to 3 months. At that point, we have to get rid. That is terribly expensive and kind of inflationary because it doesn't really produce anything. So it may be over time, once this has calmed down a little bit, and we have more lawsuits. The immigration is now the lawyer employment agency for much of the country because there's so many lawsuits. I can't keep track of them right now, but I'm not sure. That's not a great answer.
Hi, I'd like to talk about food security because I see this as a huge potential issue. We stopped USAID, so Midwestern farmers have no place to sell their crops. It's now being used for dog food. Lettuce is being stopped at the border, so if you haven't noticed, there's no lettuce in the stores right now. But there's many, many other implications long term. We all expect to go to the grocery store and see those shelves fully stocked. But I don't see that that continues because we don't have workers, we've got other changes. Can you talk a little bit about, in seeing in your crystal ball, how this is going to play out in terms of the fat and happy people in the United States?
Well, certainly we're going to be in trouble in many ways. I mean, it's interesting in that we have the Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services really pushing for a healthy diet, unprocessed food, all those kinds of things. And yet, because we are losing workers or will no longer have them, farmers just cannot produce. There was the American Enterprise Institute came out at one point with an idea that we should mechanize all farming, which got a large guffaw from anyone who farms fruits and vegetables and things, because blackberries and lettuce cannot be mechanized. You can mechanize a cabbage, it turns out. So we may be eating a lot of cabbage, but we cannot mechanize some other kinds of things. So I think for a while, I think there is a feeling in administration for farmers and for food. I think there is, but I think the people who are making most of the decisions right now are not worrying about that until it becomes a crisis.
Okay.
Which obviously, yeah, and you do have a significant number of people who voted for this president because he was going to reduce food prices. And that's what may also change things, is that when I go to the store, I'm paying more. And so that may indeed become another issue that we'll have to deal with. But those people so far are willing to say that they are willing to pay a little bit more for the success of their president. So I don't know when it will become a crisis.
Back to the people who are making these decisions, especially in the White House, as you alluded to the fact that President Trump had said he would like to see these farm workers excluded. However, the person running ICE seems to be very, very focused on people being removed, in particular Steve Miller. And as long as he is present, I see no change in ICE. I mean, as long as he's there, ICE is going to continue to remove people quickly and passionately.
I was trying not to focus on Stephen Miller because I don't really like to, I try not to focus this, but yes, Stephen Miller is the person in the White House who is adamantly opposed to any immigration. He would like to shut the door completely. He would like to, which is interesting because his grandparents actually immigrated from Russia. And so it's sort of an interesting kind of combination, but for some reason or another, he and the people that they have chosen, for instance, Chrissy Noem, who is head of ICE, who is interesting, are very adamantly opposed to right now to immigration and don't really care about the kinds of issues I've been bringing up or that these organizations are bringing up. I'm not bringing them up by myself.
It seems like we've gone to the extremes in immigration policy between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. Question is, should we know who is coming into our country as they come into the country?
I mean, every country needs to know who is coming into the country. This is one of the reasons I said the system has been underfunded for so long, is that, when you have things like what happened under the Biden administration, where we were having Venezuela and people from Central and South America, which is not, we've not seen people walk all the way from Venezuela and in Colombia before, and the kinds of, when you have that kind of influx and you don't have the basis to deal with it, you of course have problems. One of the issues now, of course, is that once they staffed up the budget, the border, it created, they were able to turn back what they did and what you can do at the border. If you meet someone, if I'm standing here and I'm about to walk into the United States here, We are legally able to stop a person and say, you are not allowed to come in. We will take your name, we will take your information, but you have to stay on the other side of the border. Once someone walks in, we have a different issue. So one of the things that Biden was able to do once they staffed up, which took a while, I mean, you can't suddenly create border officials. It's just like we haven't been able to create ICE officials, so we're using border officials and all these other people, is that they were able to stop 3,000 people a day from coming in. And so the president wants to create that same number. And one of the things I didn't bring up was that the president, part of his campaign was getting rid of rapists and murderers and that kind of thing. Well, the problem is all those people are in jail that we know of. I'm sure there are lots of rapists and murderers that we haven't caught yet. But of those ones we have that are in jail, we can't deport them until their sentence is over. So this is why when he wants to deport at least 3,000 people a day to meet President Biden's, it has to come from other places. It cannot come from the prisons because we are not allowed to take people out of prison and send them somewhere else. They have to finish their thing. Now, we do have ICE officials now in Rikers and a few other prisons ready to get them right after they finish their sentence and deport them. So it becomes a very, very confused kind of issue. But yes, absolutely, every country should know, when you fly to another country, they want to know who you are. When we do the same.
Yes, I'd like to go back to what you were alluding to a little while ago. I'm active in the medical field, and it is really a bad situation for anyone who is looking for advanced care, research. We're in trouble. My son is a cancer scientist with a very large pharmaceutical company, and he said drugs are going to be a big problem along with financing of research, and cancer's his background. But my colleagues are leaving. They're leaving. I'm in obstetrics, and because of all the issues we've had around obstetrics, people that are in their 50s are quitting, or they're going to another country. But we have a big issue with who's going to be able to maintain in the healthcare system.
No, we do really have. And especially with an aging population, of which I am one, the lack of both the turnover in doctors. I have a good friend, Lynn and I have a good friend who went through literally 6 geriatric doctors in a period of about a year with the turnover. But you mentioned another one, which is research, and a lot of the research funding is being cut, which is also creating. Some of our scientists are leaving the country and going to other countries because our research funding is being cut. So we're not going to find out as many things to do with some of the illnesses that at least I have that I wish we could do more research on. But some of that can turn around. I mean, again, one of the things we see in politics is we see swings. And eventually, at some point, we hopefully will get back to the middle where we have more control about what's going on in terms of who's in our country, but we also invite in and have the people we need.
Any other questions? Well, in that case, thank the speaker for a very good talk.